Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our EDC Coffee Chat. We are very excited to have Josh Weiss, the North Olympic Legislative Alliance lobbyist, joining us this morning. And he is going to give us an update on what's happening in Olympia during this legislative session. So just a few items before we kick this off to make sure things move smoothly and we have as few technical glitches as possible. Please put yourself on mute if you haven't already. And if you have any questions of Josh or comments, please raise your hand, or you can put your comments in the chat and we can ask that for you. So with that, I know Josh has been on multiple times with us before. Most of you know him. He's very capable and was formerly the Director of Government Affairs for the Washington State Association of Counties. And when our group did an RFP, 3-4 years ago now, it was very clear from our legislative group that he was the lobbyist that they thought we should support, and so we did. He's been great to work with over the last years, and we've accomplished many things together. So NOLA consists of Jefferson County businesses and Clallam County businesses, government, local leaders, and some nonprofit leaders from both counties, and that they comprise our steering committee. So with that, I will pass it over to Josh and let him share with you some of the work he's been doing for us in Olympia. Thanks so much, Josh. Take it away.
Thanks, Colleen. It's nice to see everybody. And Colleen, it's always nice to be with your groups. You're always so kind. It makes me feel good about myself to come and talk to you. I wish half of what Colleen said was true, but it is nice to see you all and some friendly faces and people involved in NOLA. NOLA continues to be just a really interesting entity to represent in Olympia. There's nothing like it, nothing similar that I'm aware of anywhere else being represented down in Olympia. So it's kind of a neat project from my perspective. Please do feel free and interrupt me, but I will just continue to talk, and we'll have time, I'm sure, at the end for questions also, but don't worry about jumping in. So we are on day, I think it's 31 of 105-day session. So we're getting pretty close to being about a third of the way through the legislative session. For many of you probably know this already, but the legislature works with a series of self-imposed deadlines that they need to have bills move past certain points in the process in order to still be considered eligible for action. And then, that's, of course, that can all the rules can be waived by the legislature if they want to, and they can pull a bill to pretty much any stage of the process if they want to at their own agreement. So, a bill is only dead as long as it's dead until they decide they don't want it dead anymore. The first cutoff is coming up a week from this Friday, so February 17th. That'll be the deadline to get bills out of policy committees and over to, if the bills that have fiscal impacts for the state go then to the fiscal committees. Usually in the Senate, it's Ways and Means. In the House, it can be either appropriations, capital budget, or finance. And then they have until February 24th to get out of those fiscal committees. And then they'll switch over and they'll be working on the floor, each in their respective chambers, moving, getting bills voted upon that are still alive by the entire chamber, and then sent over to the other chamber, and we do it all again. Session will be done April 23rd, is the last day of the session. And hopefully, there's no reason that we would have a special session and go long this year. So we're all anticipating getting done in April. The other big thing that will happen here before too long, on March 20th, the state revenue forecast will come out. That'll be the last set of data that the budget writers will need in order to really put the last pieces in place on their budget proposals. So I would think within a week of the 20th, We'll see the House will be putting their proposed budgets out first this year, and then the Senate will follow within a couple of days. That'll be really, that is the big name of the game in the legislative process, is getting those budgets. And they do have 3 budgets that they have to adopt: their operating budget for state agency operations, their capital budget, which funds physical capital projects for state agencies and nonprofits and municipalities, and then the transportation budget, which funds capital and operating expenditures related to transportation across the state. And just on the transportation side, we really are not expecting new expenditures. Gas tax revenues continue to be at least not growing. I'm not sure if they're declining anymore quite at the same degree they were during COVID, but they're not healthy. So we don't expect new capital projects on the transportation side. I think most of the discussion will be about how they actually schedule over the next 16 years those projects that were funded last year in the Move Ahead Washington revenue package. On the capital side, capital budget is very squeezed, very tight. That is largely because they have some really significant state capital projects that they are under obligation to fund. There's about $800 million in the next biennium that needs to go to a new wing at the Western State Hospital to ensure that the state is able to do forensic of competency evaluations and restoration, as well as treatment of individuals with criminal violations, basically. And then we still are making as a state, making significant investments in the teaching hospital, mental health teaching hospital that is being built at University of Washington. That and investments in housing, affordable housing, are really significant priorities for the legislature and the capital budget. So there's not nearly as much capacity for smaller local projects as there has been in the past. In the capital budget, it will probably just be a smaller pool of money than what we've anticipated. Operating budget, we anticipate being healthy. Revenue forecasts to date have still been really strong, stronger than forecasted. The last time the legislature wrote their supplemental budget back a year ago. Everybody, as I mentioned, is waiting for that revenue forecast to see if tax revenues do continue to come in, or if we do see economic downturn like everybody's been anticipating, but really hasn't shown up, at least on the state revenue side yet. There is a lot of, I think, will be difficult for majority Democrats, even though they have super strong majorities in both the House and the Senate. There are so many new legislators from different parts of the state, but particularly the Puget Sound core, that really have very high expectations for what can and should be purchased in the state operating budget. I think it's going to still be a very difficult process for them to get out of town without controversy internally amongst the Democratic caucus. So that's the lay of the landscape. We are still, because the first cutoff has not hit, we are still seeing new policy proposals every day. The focus really at this point has been on new bills that have been dropped. It feels like pretty much every legislator in the legislature at this point wants to have a proposal on affordable housing, on permit streamlining, on some of those topics. We're just seeing massive amounts of bills on those topics. And we're really kind of looking forward to getting that February 17th deadline so that we can start focus. We'll know exactly how big the universe is and really start focusing more on detail. So I see, Colleen, you have a question. I will just say before I take questions that I'm very much in the mode of session right now where we're triaging bills. And so we haven't, amazingly, probably to if you aren't working in the process, some of these bills we don't even get down to detail until later in session. So it's kind of vague at this point. Dealing with volume, not quality. Colleen, go ahead.
Got it. So can you describe how many bills have been created this year relative to other years? Is it pretty similar, or are there a lot more this year?
It's pretty similar. We've had about, as of Friday, I think it was, there were about 1,400 bills. That's actually probably a little under what we typically see in a 2-year session. And everything's really been kind of skewed because we were doing virtual sessions the last couple of years. But yeah, it's hard to believe, right, that 1,400 is average or a little less than average.
And so how many end up getting through that cutoff on February 17th, the first policy cutoff?
I'm going to say, this is just off the top of my head. I haven't looked at the statistics in a little bit, but it'll probably be 60% or so. Keep in mind, though, at the end of the process, only about 20% are going to make it all the way through and get the governor's signature.
Okay, that's interesting. And then my next question has to do with the capital budget. Can you give, there's a lot of entities that have made requests to our legislators to be a sponsor. You know, there's the form for a capital ask, way more than what I think is available. And you said there's a lot of pressure this year because of things that the state is trying to do. Can you explain that process a bit more to everyone? And I think there's 5 people that, you know, really decide on it.
Yeah, there's 5. I would say there's 2, probably. Yeah, about 5. That's about right. Maybe 6. Capital budget is kind of funny. So what they've tried to do over time is create buckets or pockets of money that can be spent through state agencies, through grant programs. So the best example really is like in the parks and trails and sort of sports fields. You know, the Recreation Conservation Office has all sorts of grants available each year that are competitive that entities can apply for, nonprofits and government entities can apply for. And then what those programs do is they will send a ranked list to the legislature that, you know, go through that grant process, and then the legislature gets to decide how much in total they want to spend on that particular category. So you can usually see if you have a project that, you know, the program gets funded at 20 million, you know, and you need 25 to get your project funded because it's further down the list, then you can advocate for additional funding in that category. Most of the capital budget is spent on particular buckets like that. There is one area called local community projects, which is kind of intended to be for other types of projects that don't fit in any of the other categories, for legislators to bring forward their requests that they would like to see specifically in their district. I know that generally speaking, across the entire state, the competition for those local community projects has really grown over time. And part of that is because, frankly, you know, advocates like myself that will tell clients accurately that, hey, I know that there's a parks program out there, but if this is really the highest priority in your jurisdiction, then let's go forward and ask for a specific appropriation for your park. And that is successful still. But basically, because all the other areas of the capital budget are feeling pressure, that local community project pool is getting shrunk. We're hearing in the Senate members have been told they have about $2 million per district. I've had legislators, and I don't know how it's looking in the 24th district. I would have to ask the delegation, and I'm not sure they would say for sure how many projects they've been requested, but I know other delegations have said they've gotten, you know, tens of millions of dollars worth of requests for local community projects when they have 2 or less, basically, to spread out. And the way that works basically is within that program is the legislators will go to their leadership on the capital budget committee Representative Theringer, by the way, is the chair of the Capital Committee in the House. And so he's probably of anybody in the legislature, the most important, or in the House, the most important capital budget decision maker. He will work with Representative Steele, who is his Republican counterpart, but end of the day, Theringer gets to make the decisions. Their members from their caucus will come forward and say, okay, I've got $10 million worth of requests from my district. Here's the three that I really think are the most important. Can we get enough funding for those three? And we are not involved in that conversation, and we do not want to be involved in that conversation. Our job is really to put forward the requests and make the best case for them, and then let them make that prioritization and decision.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll let you go on.
Okay, sounds good. I see Rebecca Miller asked a question about, there's a bill out, thank you. And I'm just going to answer this before I move on. That just was introduced. I think it was on the intro sheet yesterday morning, and it is a new program at the Department of Commerce that would allow associate development organizations, your EDCs, to apply for grant with Commerce for grant writers. And that's House Bill 1783. It, like I said, just was on the official intro sheet yesterday, so it hasn't been scheduled for a hearing yet, and may not get scheduled for hearing. We're getting so late in the process that it might not get scheduled. It is, let's see, all 3, 4, 5, 6 Republicans and Representative Chapman signed on to that bill. So yeah, that's something. If it is, oh, I'm sorry, it's been scheduled for hearing on Friday. I apologize. I had forgotten that detail. And we'll be supporting that on behalf of NOLA and the 2 Clallam and Jefferson EDCs. I think that answers the question.
A little bit about that, applying for grants, that is really wide open. There's so much federal funding coming in. We don't have grant writers in our county. Other large cities have numerous, sometimes one per department. And so, one person can't do everything for all municipalities, but certainly it's better than what we have right now.
I also got a separate question. I should have provided this context at the beginning of my comments. I apologize. So it's really has to do with sort of broader legislative priorities. Specifically on law reform, police pursuits, income tax, firearms restrictions. I would say all of those topics are top of mind for certain parts of the legislature. I think probably 2 of the hottest debates this session will be and are proving to be what the legislature does long-term in response to the Blake decision, which was a Supreme Court decision that said simple possession of drugs was not sufficient to prosecute somebody criminally. If the legislature does not act this session, then there will be no crime against simple possession of drugs. We've seen 4 proposals that were heard Monday morning that all deal with the Blake decision in different ways. My sense is that hopefully the legislature will pass something. If they do, it probably will make simple possession of drugs a misdemeanor or a gross misdemeanor, with pretty strong emphasis and direction to providing diversion out of the criminal system and into treatment, but still having the possibility of that criminal prosecution as a sort of criminal backstop for those individuals to make sure that they do go into treatment. But there's going to be a lot of, there's a liberal component of the Democratic caucus in both chambers that don't want to see anything to happen. There's actually a bill out there that would decriminalize simple possession of drugs. So that will not be a slam dunk. The other, the police pursuits law, same thing. Bills were heard on this not the week before last. the issue right now is that their legislature basically said that police officers, sheriff deputies can't pursue somebody that is actively fleeing in a vehicle. Law enforcement has come forward very clearly, and local governments from across the state, and said, look, this is a significant reason why we're seeing crime rates rising right now. That fact is being debated, or whether that's a fact or not is being debated. And we are seeing bills out there that one proposal is essentially to give law enforcement the authority to pursue back to law enforcement. There's another proposal that basically has the Criminal Justice Training Commission putting together a task force and making recommendations to the legislature about what the right parameters are for when law enforcement should be able to pursue. The other question was taxation. The tax structure work group made recommendations at the end of last session, end of last year. There were not the one majority recommendation from the task force was to try and move our state's B&O tax over to a margins tax, so businesses would be paying on their paying taxes on their profits, not on their gross revenue. A bill has been put forward on that, but it is extremely, there's really big winners and there's really big losers, and nobody seems to be really very excited about that bill. So it doesn't seem like it's moving forward. I think the question about income tax, the state Supreme Court heard arguments last week on the capital gains tax. If the Supreme Court rules that a tax on income is a property tax, a sales tax and not a property tax, I think that will open the door for an income tax in the state. But my understanding is the questions by the court were really skeptical of the state's position on this, and that there's a pretty decent chance that they actually throw out the capital gains tax, which would not only shut the door on income tax, but would create a budget hole in the state operating budget for this next biennium. So that'll be interesting. Tons of proposals on firearms restrictions. I wouldn't be surprised to see something pass on that as well. Let's see. I would like to talk about the NOLA priorities. And I know there's a couple of other questions. And I'm sure there'll be more at the end. So NOLA has been working in sort of three broad buckets. The first is really trying to get some relief, and specifically a pilot program on the peninsula for an electrical apprenticeship for electrical trainees who, after June 30th of this year, will need to be in an apprenticeship program if they're going to continue as a trainee. So electrical apprentices won't be able to just continue working at their shops and not be enrolled in an apprenticeship program. There have been
really quickly, the important part about that is the closest apprenticeship program to us is Puyallup. So it really puts all of our electricians at a big disadvantage, and they wouldn't be able to continue doing work in commercial businesses or governments, though most don't unless they're union.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, there is. I just learned this session. We worked on this issue last session, right? And it's opposed. Moving the deadline is opposed by the electrical union. So with the current majority, obviously that's a very difficult request. So there have been 4 bills introduced this session. 2 bills similar to the bill last year that we worked on, basically addresses the issue of what's called stranded hours. So electrical apprentices that have been working towards their trainee certification, making sure that when they enter an apprenticeship program or after the deadline, that they don't lose the hours that they've already gained, or people coming in from out of state or the military that are moving to the state don't lose those hours. In and of itself, that bill is a good bill. It's a fine bill. It's been a platform, though, for this discussion about what the impact of the deadline is going to have. And so you've seen those hearings this year. Last year, where there was similar legislation that we engaged in on behalf of NOLA, and it did see some discussion about the deadline. But this year, the tenor has really changed. Electricians across the state have really figured out what's going on this and showed up really in force at the hearing on that bill in opposition and really asking for some additional relief. The other bills that have been introduced, and House Bill 1393 was the first one, Republican with Representative Chapman bill that pushes out the deadline, the apprenticeship deadline. That bill got heard at the same time as the stranded hours bill, but it is not going to move forward. It has not been scheduled for executive session, and I would be very surprised if it actually goes anywhere. This is going to be an ugly issue, uglier, I think, than last year. We have actually made some really good progress working with Peninsula College and with our delegation, particularly Senator Van de Weg has really been the lead on this issue. I think we'll be successful getting some money for Peninsula College to work with the CITC, which is the private training institution that provides apprenticeships, to get a program going at the college. And I think that's, my recommendation has really been that that's a good place for us to be, because if our relief is contingent upon any of these bills passing, I just don't know what's going to happen. Like I said, I think that's going to be a dirty mess of a fight all session long. So that's the direction we're headed on that.
And CITC it was interesting. They testified that they were working with Peninsula College to locate in our communities, but no one had contacted anyone at Peninsula College. But the next week, Dr. Susie Ames was contacted to say, we'd like some lease space. And so we're looking for lease space for them to locate in our communities, which would be really helpful. I mean, they're the experts in this training, so that would be great. And last year we tried to get them to locate in our counties, and they said they didn't have any interest. So, our work is definitely making progress so that we have an apprenticeship program here. And I think that could also open up other formal apprenticeship programs. If they've, established things here, then maybe there's other things that could be done for the construction industry if they've already got, a lot of the footprint already here that is so expensive to create.
Thanks for providing that update and insight, Colleen. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, was that Susie?
That was Ray.
Oh, Ray, absolutely. Thanks, Ray. We're really excited about the potential there. See what we can push across the finish line with them.
We are too.
Cool. Yeah, the college has been great to work with on this. I think there's the potential to turn, a really ugly issue here into kind of a win for the region. And I will just say, this is a little bit of an aside. So the 24th district, your three legislators really work closely together. And they really, as we go through these issues, you see that they split out topics amongst themselves and kind of work together on who's going to be taking the lead. Senator Van de Weg has been just really fantastic on this issue too. So it's been fun working with him on that. The other area that we're working in is a general category that we've been calling assisting rural economically distressed communities. There's a number of items that have been working on in this. The main thing that we put forward this year was a bill that Representative Chapman sponsored, and he really has kind of been the lead in this area, that would have to do with requiring state agencies to better share data with your ADOs, your EDCs, so that they're better able to make the argument about receiving grant funding, understanding economically what's happening in the region, what types of jobs are needed in the region, and really being able to better make that case. But I will say, we put forward House Bill 1398, working with Representative Chapman on that. It went to a committee, it went to the Labor Committee in the House, rather than the Innovation and Economic Development Committee. And Representative Chapman has a bill of the chair's Labor Committee's a bill that he doesn't want to hear. And so she's holding out on this bill because she doesn't want to hear his bill. So there's a little bit of politics going on this. I think it will be interesting to see. So because the legislature works on a biennial basis, this bill will still be alive next session. I think that as the idea gets out there, floats around a little bit more, we have a little bit more time. We have spoken with the chair of the Labor Committee, as we get a little bit more time to push on this. I don't think it's that controversial, and we'll have another bite at the apple here. There are a whole bunch of other bills kind of in the general economic development space that we've been supporting. The big one is, and this was a call out specifically on our agenda last session, was extending and continuing the rural county public facility sales and use tax credit. This is the 0.09 program in Clallam called the Economic Opportunity Grant Program. It is a credit against the state sales tax, so it's not a new tax. It's been in place and working across the state in largely rural communities for over 20 years now. And the bill basically just pushes out the date to extend it for another 30-ish years. And Representative Theringer has been the lead on this. He introduced the bill again this year. We successfully got Senator Loveland, who is from Skagit County, another big beneficiary of this program, to introduce a Senate companion. The two of them in combination have really been taking turns talking to the chair of the Senate Ways and Means Committee, who has always been the person that doesn't want to pass this bill. And both Theringer and Senator Loveland have been giving us some hopeful signs that those conversations have been going well, and that there is, I think, a stronger chance this year that it passes than we've seen in the last few years. Both of those bills were heard yesterday. Commissioner Dean from Jefferson County testified on behalf of the county and NOLA. We're seeing really strong support from across the state for these bills, so we're feeling hopeful about that this year. I'm gonna pause there because usually this is a topic that people know about, want to talk about. Okay, maybe not. So if you see Theringer, continue to thank him for his work on this. He's been a real stalwart champion for us on this. There are, I think I mentioned before, that there's the grant program bill for associate development organizations. We're working on that. There's a bill that the Economic Development Association is pushing forward called, I just lost it, Supporting Innovation at Associate Development Organizations. This would provide some additional money for your EDCs. There's a bill establishing regional apprenticeship programs. It's been amended so that there would be 3 on each side of the mountains. So there'd be 3 in Western Washington, 3 in Eastern Washington. And these would be pre-apprenticeship programs where kids in high school could get going on their apprenticeship programs and certified, so that when they graduate high school, they could go directly into an apprenticeship program. This is House Bill 1013. There's not a Senate companion, but if you're interested in pull up the bill, House Bill 1013 on the website, the legislature's website. There's like 30 sponsors. It's bipartisan. There's just an incredible amount of support around this idea. So I'm thinking we probably will see something around that topic this session. think I'll just pause there. Colleen, I don't know if there's anything you want to add before we get into housing a little bit.
No, the pre-apprenticeship program, that sounds really great. I know that the West Sound STEM program has been working on programs like that. Very likely if there's, and I don't know if Bill Dowling has anything to add from the Workforce Development Council. It'd be great to see something along those lines, but then you also, high school students would have to drive to wherever that location is. And then, so that of course is a challenge for kids to get the 24 credits over 4 years while they're having to drive somewhere during the school hours. So in remote areas, it's a longer commute, or anyway. So Bill, do you have anything to add?
Colleen, the only thing that I would add is just something that we're looking at, just as state workforce directors. We were actually meeting with L&I last week on apprenticeships. And one thing that we're not seeing is the uptick from pre-apprenticeship to apprenticeship. They get an interview is what they're guaranteed, but the numbers that actually move from one to the next are not there. Especially for diverse clients. And that's around the state. So we're seeing much than when we'd like to see. We think that if we're investing in young people to do in these programs and they complete and pass the test, they should be given entrance. And we're not seeing that. There's no guarantees of that. So that may be something to keep in mind just as we're looking. This kind of was poked by not seeing any number of increase in especially the trades and diversity. Women in diversity have not made any real progress in the last 10 years. We see new apprenticeships being quite diverse, but we're not seeing in the other areas. And so when we examine the pre-apprenticeships that target especially those groups, we're not seeing the uptick. And so that's it. And as you mentioned, distance learning is, we have to see some opportunity for local practicum in our communities with work-based learning experiences and perhaps digital learning on those apprenticeship sites, other ways, so that we can cut down on that opportunity on that travel, and as you talk about, which is just unrealistic.
Yeah, and hasn't there been a lot of pushback from the unions that manage the apprenticeship programs to allow virtual type of learning environments? I'll put it in the chat. Program called Interplay that uses virtual reality, and so the students are actually trying to put things together, and then they press go and see if they did it right. It's very innovative, and in other states that's an approved apprenticeship program for HVAC and electrical and that kind of thing. And so but the Washington State Labor Council has not been open to allowing that kind of training in formal apprenticeship programs in our state.
That's correct, Colleen. Yeah, and we're even looking, about how the community college system likewise could also make that kind of availability, so we don't have to duplicate every single class, but give us access at our local college digitally to those classes of practical learning, and that we again couple that with local businesses who are willing to take on an apprentice for in-person learning, that combined opportunity. But you're exactly right. We're, we've kind of doubled down on that small group of especially in organized labor, and it's great benefits. We know that it's awesome for those that have it, but in areas like ours that don't have large amounts of organized labor opportunities, and frankly, we just saw recently organized labor participation dropped again in Washington as well. And so what are we missing? It's great to focus on young people, but we also need to focus a lot on our adult population that could transfer into these careers immediately.
Why do you think it is that the existing formal apprenticeship programs are not picking up these pre-apprentice students?
Well, I would hate to speculate, to be honest.
On this forum,
the data, yeah. Well, the data. I mean, it's very hard to kind of. I let the data speak for it and let them answer that question as to why they're not. Because frankly, that's kind of what, we're just seeing the numbers, and we want to know then and a lot of it is also the inability to really ramp up, right? Programs have very small cohorts that they can take on. And so even if the need is so much greater, and frankly, the retirements are happening so much faster, but that's another reason why this system is not particularly working well, especially in the opportunity, as you say, for this digital type of learning. So we're willing to have the conversation with anyone, but we want to make sure that we want to talk about their outcomes. And they are great jobs. I mean, that's why we want to increase them, and they're desperately needed in our communities.
Okay, thanks, Bill.
So the other big bucket that NOLA's paying attention to is housing. And as I sort of expected, this is a huge priority and focus for the legislature, and there are just about 1 billion different proposals for different things for affordable housing and homelessness. It's been, well, I guess we're not surprised. There kind of are two different major strategies that are moving forward in the legislature. One is just increasing resources and otherwise trying to make it more easier, profitable, however you want to say it, for affordable housing, investing, additional resources through the Housing Trust Fund, those types of programs. We're seeing bills that are trying to make it possible for affordable housing projects to access the sales tax credits or sales tax real estate incentives, those types of incentives. We're seeing as well bills focused on like the sale of manufactured mobile home communities, trying to keep those in the market. And then the other is like the other major focus is on the supply side. And that really has to do not just with affordable, but with like market rate housing, just trying to get more market rate housing out there. We're seeing, I think I mentioned this before, many proposals trying to streamline the local government permitting process. It's really hard to tell exactly at this point which of those bills is going to go forward. Some of them are acceptable by local governments, not all of them are. We're also seeing a lot of bills that have to do with restricting or telling local governments how to zone, basically trying to get accessory dwelling units or townhouses, multi-family housing in zones that are currently zoned for single family housing. In fact, yesterday late, House Bill 1110, which is the main middle housing is what it's called, piece of legislation passed out of the House Housing Committee. And it does still include mandates for cities above 25,000 in population. We're also seeing, some legislation continue. This is probably the third biennium in a row that the legislature continues to try and make it easier for people to build condominiums. Right now, the design defect laws in the state are really disadvantageous for builders that want to build condos. So continuing to work in that area as well. The other major, sorry, this would have been in the, I guess it's on the affordable housing side, that sort of first strategy that I mentioned. The governor came out with his budget and has a proposal that would authorize an additional $4 billion in bond capacity that would exceed the state bond limit and direct that money towards immediate construction of affordable housing. And it would require not only approval by the legislature, but it would be a referendum to the voters to be able to go beyond that debt limit. I think, something that big and that big of an idea, we typically would not expect the legislature to pick up, particularly given the tensions between the legislature and this governor. But that bill has been heard. I've been surprised by the legislators. I hear talking about it, that it might actually be something that they consider, particularly when, as I mentioned before, the limitation in the capital budget getting some additional capacity in the capital budget to build affordable housing. This would give them some capacity. There's no proposal here that the governor put forward about how you would pay for those additional bonds. So that would have to come out of just the state general fund. You know, and again, that probably will come down to what happens on that March 20th revenue forecast. So that's a big piece that is in play. And I think we'll be very interested to see how that moves forward. I know, Michael Smith, you had chatted concern about 5697 that has to do with rent control in mobile home parks. I have not been tracking that bill. I do note that it just, you know, was introduced a few days ago and has just been scheduled for a hearing. So I would not say that it's on any sort of fast track, and I'm not really sure what the impetus for that is. Yeah, I think your point about mobile home parks, the idea with that is that, you know, basically you're trying to give people that live in mobile home parks the opportunity to purchase them, rather than having the mobile home parks get purchased by a developer, have those people displaced, and then have those homes be displaced with less affordable housing alternatives. That's the general policy direction on that. NOLA's also been engaged in watching a couple of other issues that are probably of interest for local governments in particular. There's actually a bill this year to put the Public Works Assistance Account into the Constitution and give it some constitutional protections. The Public Works Assistance Account is used for infrastructure like water and sewer service. It's really kind of, you know, meat and potatoes infrastructure that's necessary for housing and other basic municipal services. It's a has been a revolving loan program, was super successful. Back in the Great Recession, 2010, the legislature swept those funds and diverted the revenue streams from them. So the revenue streams, all of them are scheduled to return to the Public Works Assistance Account at the beginning of the next fiscal year, so June 30th of this year. This bill and constitutional amendment would basically set the account up in the Constitution, have it be a protected revolving loan fund that the legislature couldn't sweep. So that would be a positive thing, and will have positive impacts for, you know, just general municipal service infrastructure across the state. There's a bill out there that has to do, we do pay attention to public lands and forestry issues, because we know that forestry, timber industry is still important for the peninsula. There's a bill out there, 5688, that the Department of Natural Resources just put forward and is being heard on Friday, that essentially would give the DNR the authority to lease out trust lands for carbon sequestration or other environmental services. I think there's a lot of concern by timber trust counties and other local governments that receive revenue from those trust lands, that this is a move towards, you know, continued move towards not being able to have active timber management on those lands. And also just a lot of concern from stakeholders down here by the fact that the DNR didn't talk to anybody about this before introducing this bill. So that will be interesting to see which direction that goes. For those of you that are tracking timber issues, this follows on the DNR's decision to lease out trust lands for carbon without taking that decision to the Board of Natural Resources and having that conversation. So a fair amount of tension around state trust land management this session. So I think it's 8:50. I think those are the topics I wanted to cover. I see there's more in the chat room here. I'm happy to just keep answering questions.
Yeah, this has been very informative. I'm pretty new to all of this, and so this has been great. Kind of hear and see how everything's been done.
Thanks, Peggy.
Yeah.
I think I see your chat about the gala coming up. That's a good reminder.
Yes.
I think, Michael, I see your chats about the mobile home stuff. Yeah, that's maybe not necessarily some clear thinking on that, but we'll see where that goes. Any other questions? I know this group is not shy.
It's awfully quiet this
I
morning.
know. Because Colleen left.
That's it. You know, she's so good at running these things.
Mm.
Well, I guess we could jump off early then if there's no other questions for Josh.
Hey Josh, it's Lori.
Hi, Lori.
Hi, when are we scheduled for the next NOLA meeting here in Clallam County?
We don't have anything on the calendar, Lori. We typically don't meet during session.
Okay,
We usually regroup after session and kind of start talking about where we want to head for next steps.
okay, so would that be more like summer?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure I knew when we needed to.
All right, I know everybody's got a busy schedule. It's Wednesday. We can probably let out a little bit early. Thank you so much, Josh, for presenting and giving a very informative. Oh, Debbie, did you have a question? Oh, I think she just went off mute.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, Peggy. Thanks for taking over and good to see everybody this morning. Look forward to talking to you next time.
Great. I hope everybody has a good day.